Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another Lunch and Learn with the Arizona Global Development Network. Today, we are happy to welcome Katee Van Horn, who is here to talk to us about how we can start our journey with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in nonprofits. So we're very excited to have her here and talk about this very, very important topic with us. So I'll hand it over to her so she can do a little bit of an intro.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Anna. My name is Katee Van Horn, as Anna mentioned. I lead BH Included Consulting and Coaching, and I have the pleasure of working with Esperanza and a few other nonprofits here in town. And because of that, I wanted to share some tips, because what I'm hearing in the nonprofit space is we don't know where to get started. We don't know exactly what we should be doing or how to do this the right way. And so wanted to walk through some lessons learned and some ideas of how you can get started in this conversation, get started in this work. Would love to start off though, just by asking the question, and you can write in the chat what your answer might be. It's what would be most helpful for you to learn today. So as you think about your own nonprofit, as you think about where you are within the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, what would be most helpful for you? What would be most helpful for you to learn? And I'm going to let you do that as I keep going through some of the slides. So if you have things that, as you're thinking about this and as we're going through the different slides, feel free to put that in the chat. And what we'll do is, as we're going through this conversation, I'll try and answer questions and try and answer any comments. So if there are things that you want to specifically hear about, please feel free to put that in the chat. When we talk about what are we doing today and kind of what are we doing in this next hour, the first thing is just talking about even just the words that we're using. So you probably have heard diversity and inclusion. You've probably heard diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a few other things. And there's also this new concept around inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And, when we think about some of the language that we're using and how we're thinking about this work, one of the pieces that sometimes get lost is, and especially in programs, and especially, when we're thinking about this, just how we're approaching this, is accessibility. So it's things even just like, in Zoom meetings, are we using closed captioning? Are we recording things? Are we, offering transcripts, things along those lines? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a bit. But language is one that we'll also be jumping into, because that's one that I think we sometimes get lost in, or sometimes gets kind of put aside. And so we want to think about language. We'll talk about the leadership and board, because that's always, a place that I think people go, what should we do with the leadership? How do we think about the board and diversifying the board? And then just talking about infrastructure. What do we actually do inside of our own teams? What do we do inside of our own nonprofit to make sure that we have the right systems, tools, or the, I always say process, procedures, practices, all those things, make sure we have those in place. And then talking a little bit about your team as well. So, as I mentioned, there's a lot of different acronyms that are being used: diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity, equality, and inclusion. And then this whole idea of IDEA, or inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. So when you think about that and you think about your own space, the first thing I tell people to do is start to think about kind of your vision for what this should look like, what you want your nonprofit to look like, how you want to be approaching D&I, how you want to be approaching this conversation. Because I think that's one that, we go, we need to do this, but what is it? What is it that we're actually trying to do? And so I like to use this model, and it's something that Deloitte built a few years ago. And I think it still works, and it works kind of in different organizations, regardless of where you are. And even if you're a smaller nonprofit, I think this is something still to keep in mind as you think about how you're introducing programs, how you're thinking about serving the communities, all of that different stuff. But when we talk about diversity and inclusion, a lot of times what we first start off, it's that compliance level. It's, hey, we did anti-harassment training, or hey, we made sure that, on our job postings, we have some sort of equal employment opportunity statement, or things along those lines. Or maybe we're thinking about affirmative action. Maybe we're thinking about some of these other places. And so a lot of times in that level one, we're just thinking about compliance. How do we make sure we're doing the things we need to do just to get by, or just to make sure we're kind of covering ourselves in case? And so a lot of times that's driven by, a legal representative or someone that's advising us in that manner. It could be if you have an HR person or someone that's helping with that. And so a lot of times, when we think about that compliance level, it is kind of the bare minimum. And this is a lot of times when you hear the comment of checking the box, that's kind of what we're talking about with checking the box, is that you're just doing the bare minimum to get by. When we transition into programmatic, this is where we start to talk about this and have some conversations and maybe think about, why are we doing this? Why is this important for our nonprofit? Why is this important to us? And you'll also try to have a change in, maybe we're starting to track demographics. Maybe we're starting to look at some different things. Maybe we're starting to talk to our team members about why this is important. And so in that programmatic stage, you're kind of doing that intro conversation and starting to really go, why does this matter? Why do we need to be thinking about this? And, and it's not just a, hey, because we're getting asked by donors. It really is a matter of, in this stage of programmatic, you're really starting to figure this out and make sure that you're doing the right things as you're kind of approaching this work. And then there's this transition point where we're really going from that programmatic to the leader-led. And this is where, your leadership team, your board is really starting to say, hey, this is important. How do we really start to focus on this and focus on creating equity, creating equality within the teams and within our group, and also just within the communities we serve? So thinking about how we're approaching the work that we do and making sure that from, the kind of that top-down approach, that these are questions that are being asked. And this is also where you start to see some of the infrastructure start to move. So things that you're doing with your team members, how you're approaching team members, that kind of stuff. This is where you'll see some of those things shift. And so that's kind of in that leader-led space. Where we want to get, and what, kind of what we're driving towards, is that integrated space. And that's really where we're leveraging the differences of everyone on the team to create value and to create a space where everyone is able to contribute, everyone is able to be their authentic selves, everyone is able to really say, how do we actually do this the right way? And they all have a common sense of purpose, and that shared sense of purpose of, this is why we do this work, and this is why this is important to us from a diversity perspective. And again, from an equity and equality perspective as well. So I start here just to kind of ground us in kind of where we are trying to go. And so when you think about the vision of your diversity and inclusion initiatives or programs, you want to start with just kind of having an understanding of, what are we even talking about and where are we trying to go? But when you think about your own kind of vision and where you want to take this space, I really tell people to start with the vision and start by asking yourselves some questions. And this isn't something that you as a leader or a board member or even a team member should do by yourself. This is something that you want to bring the team together, and you really want to have a brainstorming session or some sort of conversation about, why are we doing this? What is our shared purpose around diversity and inclusion? So, it's the first one. Why is this important to the organizations and the community we serve? Why is that important to you? Why is that important to the communities that you serve? And, we are having a lot of interesting conversations around saviorism and some of the other things that have been challenges in the past for nonprofits. And so understanding, why are you doing this, and really understanding, why is this important to you and why is this important to your organization, is something that as a team, it's a great conversation to have. The second question is, how would your organization look different if it was inclusive and equitable in every way? So if you think about, that, kind of where you're trying to go, what are you trying to achieve? Thinking about who would be on the team, who would be a part of the conversation, what communities would you maybe shift, in serving or grow in serving, things along those lines. So what are those things that might shift within your team, within your environment, within your board, within all of the pieces of who you are? And this isn't to say, hey, throw out what you're doing and start over from scratch. Absolutely not. This is really just for you to start thinking, how do we evolve? I'm sure most of you do strategic planning, every couple of years. And this is where that conversation also comes into play, is how are you, how is this part of your strategic plan? How to make sure that you're really having this conversation at a different level than you maybe have in the past. How do you move from compliance to integrated? So, in that model I just showed you, how do you start to move, and how do you start to think about the things that will need to fall into place? And so, we start with a vision, we start with goals, we start with a strategy, but then thinking about some of those tactics, some of those logistics of what would need to change. How would we need to think about this differently? So how do you move from compliance to integrated? And then lastly, which, shouldn't be last on this list because it's, such a critical piece. How do you inspire the team? How do you inspire the team to be a part of the conversation, to be, a part of the change? We all know that change management is difficult, and this is a major shift for a lot of people. And part of it is, I will say that a lot of times when I'm working with nonprofits, you have folks that have the right frame of mind and they want to do what's right and they want to do all of the things to create these equitable environments. But there are some mind shifts and some things that we still have to work on in this space to say, how can we be better? What's my personal journey that I need to take on when I think about diversity, when I think about the bias that I hold, when I see microaggressions, when I think about being an ally, some of those different things that kind of fall into this. So how do you inspire your team? How do you start to think about what does my team need and how can I help them become a part of this change and be a part of the conversation? So I mentioned language earlier, and I think this is one that, I think a lot of times people, when I start saying language, it's kind of like, okay, well, what does that even mean? Or what are we talking about? And really, there's some basic things that you can start off with on your own. And, I think a lot of times when people think about this work, there is this, oh, I have to hire a consultant. And, obviously I am a consultant, so I'm not saying don't hire a consultant because sure, call me anytime. But what I am saying is that, if you want to start doing some of these things on your own, there's some things that you can do. We just talked about the vision, but also looking at your values and the language that are in your values and the way that you're thinking about the mission that you have as an organization. Even just, again, the language that you're using within those different pieces and how they might need to shift when you have that lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it could be small tweaks to some of the words. It could be large tweaks to, hey, we had this as one of our values. Maybe that's not a value we need to be thinking about anymore, or maybe it's not critical at this point. So there's some things that you could do, but also knowing that, we have, some histories and some of the nonprofits that we are aware of that we need to reconcile, and we need to start thinking, how does that now fit into the future of where we want to go and how we want to think about this work? The second piece around language is in your handbook. So simple things like when you're reading through your handbook, are you using gender neutral pronouns? Are you thinking about, how is the language in the handbook received by your employees? How is it going to be received by future employees? So maybe the folks that you're trying to recruit that aren't there yet. And the same goes with job postings, looking at gender neutral language, recognizing that in job postings, some things that we are aware of just from the research that has been done around, people of color and women are less likely to apply for a role unless they meet every single requirement that's listed in a job posting. So being thoughtful about the language that you're using in your job postings and in your handbook will also be really important, just because we want to make sure that anywhere we can think inclusion, constantly think inclusion. And who are we not including with the language that we're using? Who might be sitting on the sidelines that isn't going to come have a seat at the table because they're like, oh, that's not for me. This isn't a place for me. This isn't a place where I would be accepted. So being thoughtful about where are you being inclusive and where do you need to maybe do a little work? When you think about your program descriptions, your program applications, the work that you do that's kind of at the core of who you are, thinking about how the language is used and who you're actually targeting. And by, obviously you all have different groups that you're in, communities that you're working with, but are you leaving people out? Are you excluding people without, unintentionally? And this is where, when we talk about language, this is also where we talk about that being intentional and really being thoughtful about, again, who's not there? Who are we missing? And how do we make sure from a program description, application process, all of these things, and even where are you sharing your programs? A lot of times when you're sharing, hey, please apply for this, or hey, we have this activity going on, are you going to the same places you've always gone? Or are you trying to go to communities that maybe you haven't served before, or maybe that you haven't seen a lot of, action from? Making sure you're being thoughtful of, again, are you excluding folks unintentionally because you haven't let them know, hey, this is what we do. And we're here to help you. We're here to serve. And we want you to be a part of this conversation. The other piece is thinking about vendors. This is one that I think a lot of times, it can be difficult, because when you are being very budget conscious and you're being very thoughtful about, spending and how you want to make sure you're using the dollars that you have wisely, vendors is something that we sometimes forget to think about. But again, if you're talking about underserved communities and how you can help them, thinking about, okay, are there ways that you can partner with community banks, with community vendors, with restaurants, and even the simple things like, hey, we're going to have an event. Are you using a local restaurant? Are you using someone that can, help do the catering? Making sure you're being thoughtful about even just those things that might seem like, oh, I just can call this chain restaurant and they'll take care of it for me, or, oh, I'll just stop by Starbucks. All of those things matter, and those dollars really matter as you think about how we approach the communities we serve. And then lastly on this one, your website. And this is another one where, you can be more inclusive and be thoughtful about the language that's out there and how you're approaching the markets and the communities that you serve. And the website is another one where there's, I think a lot of you offer different opportunities for folks and different resources for folks. The language that you're using on those resources and how that language is either inclusive or not can be something to just, again, consider. How are you thinking about even, are you sharing who's on your board? And are you sharing, hey, we're always looking for new board members, or we're looking for a board member from the community, or whatever it might be, and thinking about some of those things that are on your website and how those would feel to someone that might be approaching your organization for the services that they might personally need, or to recommend you, or whatever it might be. So just being thoughtful about your website and how different resources are provided. This is also one, and obviously this is one that I know Esperanza is very thoughtful about, of the languages that you have on your website. If you are serving certain communities that use specific languages, do you have interpretation tools? Do you have it translated into different languages? And there's a lot of tools that you can use to do that. And also thinking about, folks with disabilities. Are you being thoughtful about, if they can't come to your website, are there other ways that they can approach this? This is one that I recently saw a couple of companies doing, which I think is really great. On their job postings, they actually have a line item in their job posting that says, if you need some sort of accommodation to apply or to be a part of our interview process, let us know and we'll help. And it's a simple step. Here's an email address you can reach out to, a phone number you can call, whatever it might be. And some of those things, which again seem real simple, can just kind of add that extra layer of accessibility, add that extra layer of inclusion to whoever might be approaching your team. Leadership and board. So this is one that, a lot of times everyone's like, oh, we need to change the makeup of the board. We need to think about our leadership. And that's absolutely a place that, you can make some major changes and you can have some major impact. But I also want to be very cognizant of the fact that you have board members that are, a lot of times volunteering their time and their efforts and their energy. And so we want to be very thoughtful about, we're always thankful and we're always very, we love that they are there to be a part of the conversation, and we love that they're there to be supportive of what we're doing. From a leadership perspective, I don't have to share with you all the numbers on kind of where we are within leadership in nonprofits, that you have a lot of very white leadership and team members that are people of color. And so thinking about how you increase in your leadership team, whatever it is that you're trying to do from is it a person of color? Is it actually in nonprofits, it's usually adding men to the team, not women, because women are dominating nonprofits, which is great. So just thinking about some of those things of, again, who's not sitting around the table and who's not there that should be. And especially as you think about the communities you serve, making sure you're being thoughtful about that. I always say this when I'm talking about leaders, when I'm talking about teams, is you're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time within this work. And I think that the biggest piece is just recognizing that we're all learning and this is a journey. And, that's not to say that, hey, making mistakes is good or okay. It's just a matter of acknowledging that you're not going to get everything right the first time. The biggest piece is that first point there, being accountable. Acknowledging when you've done something wrong and saying, wow, I misspoke, or I did that wrong, or I approached this the wrong way, or I didn't ask the right questions, or I didn't listen. And that's one that I think so many of us, we want to have the answers. We want to know what to do. Pausing and listening to your team, listening to your communities, all of these different places, that helps us be more accountable. And that helps us to really learn more and do better in the future. So being accountable, saying, you know what, I screwed up, I'm sorry, and doing better as you move forward. That's how you hold yourself accountable. And that's also how you model for your teams and for other folks. This is what we want you to do. We want you to, it's okay if you make a mistake, but we want you to admit that and make sure that we're doing better in the future. As I mentioned, we're all on a journey, and this is all about continuous learning. There is no endpoint to diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's no, oh, I'm done now and I'm an expert. I do a podcast with a very dear friend of mine, and that's one of the things we talk about a lot is none of us are experts. And it's just because there's so much that's constantly coming out, and there's so much to learn, and there's so much to do. So that continuous learning and that continuous taking in what you can and learning everything you can, and it is ever evolving. And it's also that, as you learn different lived experiences from different people and hear different stories, it will shift how you think and how you approach different things. And that's important, and that's critical to the conversation. Making sure you're valuing all people. And, this one is one that I think for the nonprofit space, you all get this, and you all do this on a daily basis. The value that you have for people and really have, just in the communities that you're serving and with each other. That's part of why I love doing this work in the nonprofit space, is that you get valuing people for everything they bring to the table, for all of the differences that you're able to say, what do you think about this? How do you think about that? And really getting your team members involved in the conversation, and that valuing of your team members and bringing everyone along on the conversation. Just really, it's something that, again, you all I know do well, but it's just a good reminder as you're thinking about this work. I already mentioned this, but, being thoughtful about saviors. So, I think, again, there is some historic context here where there have been folks maybe that have not had the best intentions, or maybe did or thought they did. And so we just want to be thoughtful about saviorism. And again, that goes for your website. How are the images showing up on your website? And I'm sure you all have seen, where you'll have a white person in the middle of a group of people of color going, look at me, I am saving the world, I'm doing the things. And just being thoughtful even about that stuff that is kind of reinforcing a message that you don't want to reinforce. You really want to be part of these communities and do this in such a way that it's not, I'm fixing this group that needs help. You're bringing everyone along, and everyone, again, needs to be valued for who they are. We must do this work. So, I am having conversations in the for-profit space and in the nonprofit space, and there are, mixed views or mixed reviews. You have some folks that are, oh yeah, we should do this, or hey, we just need to do what we need to do to be compliant with different regulations or whatever it might be. But this work is so critical to the United States, across the globe, as we think about how do we actually create sustainable environments, sustainable communities, sustainable everything. We have to do this work, and this has to be conversations that we're having, and it's hard. And so there is the piece that you go, okay, I don't want to do this today. I don't want to go take a nap. I don't want to be a part of this, but we have to be doing this work, and we have to be a part of this conversation, even when it gate hard. And that goes back to the, you're going to make mistakes. On those days when you make mistakes, you're gonna, want to go crawl into bed and go, no, not doing it today. But knowing that and accepting that you're going to make mistakes and knowing that you're going to do better in the future, that will help for sure. When we think about our board and leadership teams, there's a few things that, we want to be thoughtful about: diverse perspectives, just diversity overall. And the diversity dimensions that we all kind of are familiar with and know, but there's a couple things when you're thinking about your board. So looking at the age of your board and looking at different generations, making sure you're bringing in folks from these next generations and the younger generations that are coming into the workforce that are going to be part of these conversations. And I'm sure a lot of you who've had conversations with the groups that are new to the workforce, there's such a passion around, I want to have a purpose in what I'm doing. I want to have a purpose. And so when you think about your board and leadership makeup, it's a great group to tap that maybe has been untapped. And there's also just so many ideas. There might be even too many ideas, in which point, there's that balance you have to strike. But, just being aware of that as you think about who's on your board and making sure you're being thoughtful about the board. Race and ethnicity, I think this is one that's all of us pretty much are aware of and are really trying to work on, but making sure that's something that, is on kind of on your list of things to be considering. Participants in your program. So this is one that I think is sometimes overlooked, but if there are folks that have graduated from programs that you've offered or have been a part of programs, and so they're able to have a different insight and a different level of, hey, here's what this is really like. Let me share my experience. Folks that have had, we talk about having lived experiences. When you have participants in your program, those are folks that can offer a different level of perspective that you won't have unless you've been a part of the programs that you offer. Socioeconomic status and professions. So this is one that I think is coming up, and it's a discussion that's happening in the nonprofit space right now around, a lot of boards, there is a financial commitment to join a board or a financial expectation. And that is kind of being put aside or being thought of in a little bit of a different way now. And it's just because of the fact that for so long it has been people with money, older generations, all of these different things, folks that are more established or are able to bring other donors to the table, whatever it might be. But thinking about who are you missing out by excluding folks if they're unable to make that financial commitment? Who is not around your table that could give you different perspectives and different ideas on what else you could do and how else you could generate funding, et cetera. So just being thoughtful about socioeconomic status and professions and having some diversity there is also one to be thoughtful about. Gender and sexual orientation are another layer that it has largely been overlooked, and we need to, make sure we're thinking about that diversity as well. Thinking about folks who have disability, thinking about faith-based beliefs or lack thereof. So depending on, what you need or, what your mission is of your organization, are there, faith-based that you need to be thinking of or be thoughtful of? Residents from around the state that you're serving. So, I'm sure quite a few of you from Arizona, but if there are folks from out of state, thinking about all of the different residents in your state. I think we have such a richness around our states, regardless of where you sit. Are you getting folks that represent all of the different communities within your state, within whatever your, area is that you serve, and being thoughtful about that? I'm sure this is an example of a board matrix, and it's basically exactly what we just talked about on that last slide. So it's a way for you to kind of keep a track and kind of keep a matrix of who is on your board currently and who are those prospects that you are targeting that you want to join the board. Now, this is something that usually your governance person will handle, your governance committee will handle, but it's something that a lot of organizations are now using. And, this is something obviously that you keep confidential, that's, just for the board to review, but it is really kind of forcing the conversation of who do we not have? Who else should be around this table that is not today? What knowledge and expertise are we missing? What are the competencies that we're looking for? So, I just was recently having a conversation with someone about a board that they were asking me to be a part of, and they're saying, oh, we need someone that has HR experience. And, and so there's different experiences that you're going to be looking for as you think about your board, just because they're going to have, again, those different perspectives and those different ways of thinking about things. And so just being cognizant of that and making sure that, this is just an example. And this is one, it's from Tools for Change, like cause and effects. And, you can use whatever matrix you want, but it's something that you can do. And as we also know, this conversation is coming up from some of the larger foundations as well, as they, are deciding on funding and who's getting grants, et cetera, who's getting funding. So this is something that, I think GuideStar has a survey now that they're using with nonprofits. So there's some different things that you can do, but I wanted to share this with you all. And the piece that I will say here, you're going to look at this and it's going to make you uncomfortable to be asking these questions and to be having this conversation. And I get that. And what I would say to you is, what are you using the information for? If you're using the information for something not okay, then that's a different conversation. If you're using it to say, who's not present, who's not around the table that needs to be, or using it for something to get funding or to, expand what grants you're writing, whatever it might be, this is something that, will be helpful for you, but it should be kept in confidence, and it should be something that, only a few members of the team have who actually need it. It shouldn't be something that's, widely shared, because there are certain things that maybe people don't want to have public, or, you want to use this in an aggregate. You don't want to use this as, oh, so-and-so is this, keeping that really, keeping that confidential. We also want to talk about infrastructure. So, I think a lot of times when we're in organizations, they think diversity and inclusion, and the only real topic that comes to mind is, what's the demographics of the folks on my team? That's the first part, or the demographics of the folks on the board, whatever it might be. But there's a lot of infrastructure pieces. And this is when we talk about systemic racism, when we talk about the systems that are keeping people in, subordinate positions. We have to be thoughtful about the infrastructure. And the example that I give folks, and this is in the for-profit space, but Salesforce, large tech company, they did a pay equity analysis in, I think it was 2013. And when they did the pay equity analysis, they realized that the women on their team were grossly underpaid. And so they forked over millions of dollars to bring everyone up to parity and make sure, hey, people are being paid equitably for the roles that they're doing. Great, awesome. They got a lot of great PR for it. Everything were so wonderful, amazing. Well, then 2 years later, they did another pay equity analysis, and guess what? They were in the same boat. And it was because they had not mandated changes to the systems and the processes of how they did promotions, of how they hired people, of how they thought about all of these, how did they develop their folks? And so pay equity continued to be an issue. And that's when we talk about some of the systems that are in place that we need to pull apart, that we need to break. That's what we're talking about. That's, the plainest example that I can give you is, until we think about the background and think about what is the tool being used or how are we using the tools, that will continue to be an issue. So the first piece is that, D&I and the whole work here needs to be part of your strategic imperatives. So, I know a lot of you do strategic planning every couple of years and usually have a 3 to 5 year roadmap or whatever it might be. Making sure that you're making updates to that, if you haven't already, to really think about, how does D&I, how does this work fit into your overall strategy and fit into how you're doing this work. I am working with a nonprofit in town right now, and they have completely shifted their entire team because they're changing how they're doing some of this infrastructure. So, we talk about this strategic imperative around D&I and making sure that's part of this conversation. That's how you actually start to see change. And it's not a flip the switch and everything's better. It takes time, it takes effort, but it needs to start now. The first one is data. When you think about the infrastructure, I just shared with you that board matrix. But thinking about the data that you have on your team members, on the communities you serve, all of these different pieces of data that you have, and also all the data that's out there on the nonprofit space. There are so many amazing people doing great work around data of who's in our communities. We have brand new census data that we're now looking at that is telling a very different narrative than the last time we got our census. Making sure you're using data to think about, how do we approach this work? How do we think about this work? But there's also a piece here that's what I call the employee net promoter score. So, a lot of us know net promoter score. Hey, if you have your phone, you'll get a survey from them. Would you recommend this iPhone to your buddy down the street? Sure. Yes, I would. No, I wouldn't. That's your net promoter score. That's, part of the equation to your net promoter score. And it's the same thing in an organization. Would you recommend this place as a great place to work? Or would you recommend this to your friend or family member to come work here? having that sort of data, whether that's through a survey, whether that's through some sort of anonymous poll, whatever it might be, to just understand, how are people feeling about working here? Are they looking for another job? Are they wanting to, what do they need from you that they're maybe not getting? But using that data and really being thoughtful about what can that inform, how can that change how you're approaching your infrastructure? I already talked a little bit about, sourcing and recruiting earlier in the conversation, but this is another one where are you actually posting jobs? I think this is another one that people kind of overlook, or it's, oh, I posted it on Indeed, or I posted it in this nonprofit space, or whatever it might be. One of the things that, I think some of you are part of the Alliance of Arizona Nonprofits, they actually just shifted on their job postings that you now have to share compensation data, which is a huge deal. And it's something that, that transparency is something that folks want to see. And it also saves a lot of time for everyone involved in the process. But those types of things that are like small shifts that maybe don't seem like a big deal, how you're recruiting, how you're sourcing for candidates, how you're going out and into the market and sharing who you are and selling your organization to those folks that you might want to have join. All of those need to be thought of in this lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, because the folks that are joining the workforce are folks that are saying, tell me the why, why would I want to join your organization? What do you do? How is that going to really align to the purpose that I have? So those are really critical. And even folks that have been in the workforce for a long time, I myself always look at, what is the purpose of the organization? Do I align to what they're doing? When I'm taking on new clients, I want to understand a little bit about what they do to make sure it makes sense that we are partners, because there are some organizations that it maybe doesn't make sense to partner with. Onboarding, how do you bring people into the organization? And some of you might go, I don't know, they just start on day one and I give them a computer and some pens and everything seems to work out. That's not the answer. Unfortunately, I would love for that to be the answer, but sitting down with them and making sure you have a plan for what does their first 30 days look like? Who should they be meeting? Who should they be talking to? Have you introduced them to the team members? Have you created spaces where they can interact with the team members? Which I know is difficult, in these remote times and in the COVID situation that we're in. But how are you creating some, at first artificial, but it will become organic interaction so that they can get to know the team and understand what do other people in the organization do. When I go in and start working with an organization, I like to meet with each team member. And sometimes I'll be like, okay, well, you're called the such and such. What does that mean? Like, what do you actually do? Like, what is your work actually, what are you doing? And so giving people that space that they can get to know their team and understand the history of the organization, sitting down and going over an org chart to say who's who, just so people know. And so they understand kind of what does the organization look like and where do I fit in? And how does the widget that I'm building help with the organization, help the folks we're serving? Development. This is another one that there are so many tools and resources now that we, have the great fortune of having access to that are, all about free resources around learning and development and growing our skill set in these different spaces, and not just around diversity. There are quite a few. And if you want any resources, reach out to me. I can share some of the different resources that are available that are free. But it's also about developing their skill sets as a nonprofit team member, helping them understand, maybe it's going and sitting with someone in another team. Hey, I'm in accounting. I'm going to go sit with someone on the programs team to understand what they do, because I just play with numbers all day on an Excel spreadsheet. I don't get, what do we actually do every day? Just making sure you're really being thoughtful about the development of your folks. And this is also helpful, as your team expands. I think so many of you, and I praise the work that you do because it is amazing. And I know it is a lot of times you don't get the praise that you deserve. And so it's also thinking about from a development perspective, you have a lot of folks that are probably wearing multiple hats. And so thinking about how you can give them development so they also feel like, yes, I'm working very hard, but understanding the correlation of what they're learning and what they're adding to their toolkit, how they're actually developing, making that correlation for them and helping them understand that, yes, you're working on, 5 different projects. Here's what each of those is actually helping you develop and helping you really understand as you kind of grow your skill set in this space. That's one that I think, I'm always someone that's an advocate for taking on whatever project I can or understanding what else can I do, because that's how you learn and that's how you grow, and helping your folks get that, but also thanking them and, appreciating the work that they're doing because they're all working hard. Compensation and benefits, I already mentioned, kind of just the transparency when you're doing job postings and when you're being, when you are listing out some of the things that you offer. And I also know compensation and benefits, this can be a tough one in the nonprofit space because you want to be thoughtful about every dollar that is not going into the communities you serve. But being thoughtful about, are there benefits, are there things that would make sense for us to offer or would make sense for us to be thinking about with who we have currently on the team and also who we might want to add to the team. So just recognizing that compensation and benefits is something that, we just need to be aware of and need to be thoughtful about. Vendor management, I think this is, again, one, just tracking where are you spending money? And once you start to track that and start to, are you spending money in minority owned businesses or women owned businesses? Are you spending money? Are you, using when you're doing, your RFPs or RFQs, are you being thoughtful about where those are going and having a statement even in them of, we will consider, or we want to consider more diversity within, the folks that we are working with and the vendors that we choose. Those statements can go a long way to making people go, oh, wait, maybe I should apply for this. Maybe I should, try to be one of their vendors or whatever it might be. So really being thoughtful about how you can continue that conversation. And lastly, on infrastructure is just culture. And this goes back to the values, the mission, the vision, making sure that you are modeling the culture that you want and recognizing that your weakest link is actually driving your culture. And that's one that, it hurts me to say that, but we know that, a lot of times that person that is the gossiper or the person that's maybe not being as productive or isn't as engaged can create a space where you're not getting the best out of your folks. Recognizing that culture is really driven by all of us own culture. Every team member is a part of it and everyone owns the space. So it's, what culture do you all want? And let's get there and let's really drive this together. So being aware of your culture and being aware of how that really impacts the infrastructure and impacts the work that we're doing here around diversity and inclusion. And lastly, and I just talked about this a little bit around the team. And, I talk about inclusion and we talk about this, but I want to just share a little bit of a definition, because sometimes when we talk about inclusion, we kind of, it can get, people might push back on it a little bit for certain reasons. But when we talk about inclusion, really it's that mindset shift for all employees, where we believe we are all responsible for embracing, respecting, accepting, and valuing differences. That's inclusion. And that's, a definition that I think all of the team members that you have should be able to get on board for, hopefully. And if not, then that's something that, you would need to discuss. But that's what, when we talk about inclusion, that's what we're talking about, is that everyone can show up as their authentic selves. And it's really about embracing those differences, valuing those differences, and understanding and leveraging those differences to say, how can we be even better? How can we drive innovation and do things that we maybe haven't been able to do before? What compliance is not about, and I just call this out again, because I think this is where people kind of get stuck. It's not a compliance number-driven activity with a gender, race, or sexual orientation lens. It isn't just, we need to have this many of whatever. That's not what we're trying to achieve. It's also not about involving everyone in everything. That's something that people sometimes are like, oh, well, if I do inclusion, then I have to ask every single team member, we're never going to get anything done. That's not what inclusion is about. Inclusion is about making sure that the right people are at the table, the right people are informed of what's going on and a part of decision-making and are a part of the conversation around how are we going to do this the best way possible. Inclusion is also not about working with people who are different just to check a box. So that's not just, oh, we're going to have a Black woman on the team just because that's going to, we need to have someone from that space. No, it's again, making sure that you're leveraging the differences of folks that are at the table and making sure that you're understanding, wow, what value does that person bring because they're here? What are they sharing and able to bring that we hadn't known before, or didn't have that perspective before? And it's also not about sacrificing productivity or overlooking underperformance. This is also another one where, and this one is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, I'll be honest. When people say, oh, we're going to have to lower the bar if we are hiring for diversity. No, actually, you're raising the bar. And I want to be really careful about that, because you're raising the bar because you're bringing someone who isn't already there to the table, who is going to have a completely different perspective and viewpoint. And wow, what value that will bring to what you're doing already. So, and the assumption that someone is not going to have the qualifications or not going to be as good as, because they are, a part of a diverse group or an underrepresented or underserved group. That one gets me fired up. I could go on for a while, but I'm going to let it go. And then it's also not about overlooking underperformance. And this is the whole idea that you're not going to let people get away with stuff. You're not going to let people underperform. It's about, again, valuing what they bring to the table, but also evaluating them on the work that they're doing and how they're living your values. So when you're looking at performance, you're looking at the right things. You're not looking at who they are, or, the color of their skin, their gender, anything along those lines. You're looking at how are they actually performing and how they're contributing to the group. I wanted to share this slide with you just because I think it's something that's also important when we talk about this conversation around diversity is, what does it mean? And having these three pieces to the puzzle, it's the inherent diversity, or the diversity you're born with, the acquired diversity, what you have acquired through the experiences, interactions, and surroundings that you have. And then also that organizational diversity, where you sit in the organization, what department you're in, your seniority, your management status, all of those things. And not one person is defined by one dimension. So understanding and really being, thoughtful about all of these different pieces to who each individual is something that we want to keep in mind. This is, it's a different thing that I don't think comes up a lot, but it needs to be talked about, especially in the nonprofit space, and that's power. And when we talk about power, when we talk about, who is funding you, how you have to interact with them, all of these different things, being thoughtful about the power that you have. I think there's something that, we need to just be thoughtful about the power over, the power under, which is someone is, in the position of power, someone is subordinate. Those are not great places. What we want is that power with, so working with each other and really leveraging our differences, and that power within. What power do we have? What is our own agency? So just recognizing that and understanding that, those types of power that we have and the types of power that we need to be thoughtful about in our nonprofit and how that can show up is really critical. So I'm going to stop talking now, because I think we have a few questions that are coming up. So if you have a question, feel free to take yourself off mute, or Laura, it looks like I have your start of one in the notes here in the chat. Laura, if you want to take yourself off mute, yes, the group is here to help.
Well, the group knows I run a health humanitarian in Latin America, in rural Latin America. And we've had some interesting situations in the last few years that may or may not be unusual. Maybe others have similar experience, but we've had, and I was so happy and proud of this, we had two transgender female community health workers that were elected to our program. And the problem we had with each of them, and again, I was so thrilled about this, was not that they were not accepted by their community. Nobody had an issue using the pronouns they preferred, treating them the way they wanted to be treated. But we had several members in our brigade, and of course, Mexico's a very Catholic country. They have very strong LGBTQ opinions, of them refusing to use the preferred pronouns or treating them differently. And I had an aside with them, And it's a little delicate because their doctors or volunteers are very valuable members of our team. But I had to explain to them that everyone is welcome where we are, and we accept everyone as we find them. And that I didn't want to make a big scene about it, but that if that was going to be an issue with them, then I would prefer they not have contact with that health worker, because I didn't want to sour her experience or the experience of the group, or create animosity in a community that you would normally expect to not be accepting of a transgender person. And we've had here and there similar things related in the gay community, that we had a gay doctor that got a little bit of grief from his colleagues that were also volunteers. So I say it's unusual because when I attend workshops or read things about diversity and inclusion in the workplace, it's usually the things that you covered and not this more unusual situation. And I'm wondering who else may have run into this, because we are talking about developing countries, people that may not have been exposed as much to, especially where religion is a factor, to the LGBTQ community. Of course, it almost goes without saying, we still go through a lot of the gender issues of women just not receiving the same level of respect as their equally qualified colleagues, male colleagues. So I just thought I'd be really interested to hear what everyone else's experiences are and how they've handled them. Or maybe I'm the only one.
Take yourself off and share.
I don't think we've had an experience with that so far, so I can't really speak to it. Sorry.
So Laura, I'll give you some thoughts, and if anyone else wants to jump in too, please feel free to do that. The biggest thing that I would say is keeping all of your folks safe. And so even for those transgender women, making sure, and I think you did the right thing in keeping them safe, to keep them in a space that they don't have to have interactions where they would be uncomfortable, or they would be marginalized, or they would be treated in a disrespectful manner. I think one of the pieces that I focus on with organizations is, I'm not here to change someone's beliefs, but I am here to change their behaviors. And what I mean by that is they can have whatever beliefs they want to outside of the four walls of the organization, but while they're working for you in whatever capacity that is, this is the expectation of the behavior. And so, understanding that their beliefs are whatever they are, that is theirs to have outside of the four walls, or, I'm saying four walls, it's not four walls, so I'm sure where they're working. But, with that work, making sure that they understand this is the expectations of how you treat everyone, regardless of who they are. We are respectful to everyone we interact with. We are respectful, and I don't know what your values are of your organization, but even, circling back to that and kind of using that as here's something to keep in mind or something to be thoughtful about. If you don't have a code of conduct, that would be another way to kind of approach it, is to have,
good idea,
an attorney and HR person write up a code of conduct, because again, it's not about whether I believe or don't believe, or agree with or don't agree with, or any of those things. It's about you're respectful to each member of the team, and you interact with them in a professional manner, period. So I don't know if anyone else has anything
that
else.
idea. I like that idea of a code of conduct. It's not like it's been a frequent or became like a serious issue, but I would like to head it off before it would happen again. And like I said, I was just so proud and impressed that, because it's not common at all. And I mean, we're serving 500,000 people now, to meet transgender people in rural communities because they're often not safe to be that open. So I was thrilled. I was thrilled at the community cohesiveness and support that they received. They were some of our best health worker students, and super proud at the end. It was actually a shock to me that the ones that had the harder time accepting them were the educated urbanites from Guadalajara, not the community members. And because they're not employees, it's, a little bit of a tiptoe, but I like that idea of a code of conduct, because I completely agree with you. You can have your own opinions based on whatever religion or whatever, but in this setting, I think it's important that everyone feel accepted, supported, and included. And if that's not something you're in a place to be able to offer, then you need to separate yourself inconspicuously to a space where you can be of help and not make the other person uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And I think that's critical. And that's not just, hey, it's nice to have. You're keeping your team members safe that way. And I would also say, yes, it's not a common thing, but I would also wonder in those rural communities, how many folks are now looking to those team members and going, oh, it's okay that I have, that I am this way, or, it's okay if I am also transgender or whatever it might be. And so you're opening doors there that you probably aren't even aware that you're opening, which is amazing. So kudos to you, Laura.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you for your presentation today, too.
I'm not sure I understand.
Of course. So we are at time. Siri's yelling at me. We are at time. So please feel free to, if you have any questions, reach out to me. My email is listed there and my website is there as well. And Anna, thank you so much. Yes, the Inclusive AF podcast is the podcast I co-host with my friend Jackie. And we talk about all things diversity, equity, and inclusion. So feel free to take a listen. Thank you so much for being here, Anna. Thank you so much for inviting me. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us. I've learned so much today, and there's a couple nuggets of wisdom that you dropped that I was just like, whoa, that totally makes sense. And thank you so much for providing all these resources to us. I'm gonna add this to our YouTube page. I will be sharing it through all our social media. So if any of you present here want to share this precious resource with anyone, you can just forward it to them. It'll be super easy because I think there's a lot to be learned from this, and this is just step one. So thank you so much, Katee, again for joining us. This was wonderful.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great rest of your day.